Kinsey.
Is that your first or last name?
First name.
Yes. I've been waiting to get it. My wife got a gift card to this place in my
Last name?
Frank, C-O-R-N-S-E-K.
Are you spelled Kenzie? Yes.
It's the details.
Hi, I'm Janet. Nice to meet you too. Thank you. You know about the mics? I do know that a couple times in the last quarter, I know, bummer. It is a bummer. Most important one here. I get a lot of great comments, and I'm like, I reviewed it and I was like, darn it. So sometimes, not the whole time, so just make sure it's catching their voice. So, that's all. That's fine. Okay guys, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. I will start by introducing our panel members, and then basically if you have a question, I'm just going to have you raise your hand so I can come over to you. I'm going to give you this mic so you can ask your question to the panel members. Just make sure that you're talking into the microphone so that way our recording, and if anybody's watching via our live stream, they can hear those questions that you're asking. Because if you don't talk into the mic, we're not going to be able to pick that up. So basically that's how it works. You ask the questions, you get some expert, wonderful advice, and then we'll be here for about an hour, so we'll be here till 6 o'clock. So make sure if you do have any questions, you get those asked, okay? And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So we have John Hine right here. He is a certified financial planner with Principal Financial Group in West Des Moines. He's a graduate of Simpson College, and his wife, Michelle, graduated from DMU's DO program in 2008. He focuses his practice in the medical field and works with residents and fellows in construction.
You know, we ended up moving into Broadlands. It was a great deal, but we own this home. And we rented it out, which is also an okay option. But here's what I would tell you. Your time is going to be so constrained focusing on learning and using your education here to jumpstart your career through the residency program. You will have a hot water heater go out. Your garage door will break. Things will happen with this property that you're probably, for me and my wife, we didn't have the skill to take care of ourselves. So we ended up having to hire people and scheduling times to come out. With her schedule and my schedule, it was very, very difficult. So taking kind of the financial planning piece of it, you know, is it better to rent or own? Depends. I would suggest to you, to Michelle's comment, it's very difficult if you don't have a very clear time frame and how long you're going to stay in a location to make that decision. And I think young people in particular, I fell into this trap. We're in a very big hurry to own a home. You know, that's what we do. We get married, we get through school, we start a job, we buy a house. You know, I would caution you to really strongly consider other options and then make sure that you wanted to be in the location. From a financial standpoint, can you get a loan? There are many, many offerings that are coming through all kinds of banks now that, to Michelle's point, will finance you 100%. You can get a loan based on your debt load through school and a very attractive interest rate. But I will tell you, you know, the time management piece of owning a home, nobody talks to you about. And the other mistake that I see a lot of my clients make is they buy this house in residency and they can afford the mortgage payment. They can't afford a $300 lawnmower and a shovel and a hedge clipper and all the kind of death by 1,000 cut expenses you have with owning a home. So that's the second piece I would have you consider is, you know, what is my actual net cost that are going to come out of my pocket in addition to the mortgage payment? But I've seen a lot of residents, it's kind of a 50-50. If they don't provide housing, a lot of times it's either rent or own, right? I've seen people do both, and I would suggest that the majority of the time they're stuck with a townhome or a house that their job takes them out of state or clear away from the community, and they're having to commute back to try to sell this thing, and it's not easy under the constraints of a doctor's schedule. So that would be maybe a different perspective to consider. But financially speaking, if the location's good and you work with a good realtor, you buy it at a discounted value, absolutely it's a great decision.
I'll just add my perspective too, and I'll also just kind of give you my personal experience of things. We didn't, when I moved for residency in Michigan, we didn't buy. We rented, and so I guess I would just also say, look at your market. So, you know, there are some places where the rent is a lot better, of kind of a bargain, if you will, over purchasing, over buying a home. And we were able to find, I mean, this was West Michigan, but we were able to find a duplex with a 2-bedroom, a garage, and it was $700 a month. So after 3 years, that was about $27,000. And granted, you don't want to throw away $27,000, but that's very different than, you know, purchasing a home and all the expenses that are involved with that, and your roof caves in, there's $10,000, you know, that you have to fork over fairly quickly. So there's a lot, I mean, everybody's kind of put a lot of good ideas out on the table, and there's not really necessarily a right or wrong answer. There's just a lot of things to consider. Maybe your primary goal, and like the thing that you really, really want, is a home, and then that's fine. The other thing that you could do is save for a home or save for a down payment during those 4 years, or at least part of it or something like that, and then maybe have a little bit better idea of where you want to be. Because also too, it's nice, I think it's always nice before, when you move to a new place, renting at least for a while, because you don't really know, if it's a new city, you don't really know the area, you know, if you have children, you don't know the school systems, you don't know kind of what the lay of the city is. So I think that can be helpful to live in a place for a little while, even though it's a pain to move again. But those would be some thoughts in addition to it. But also, in addition, if you know, being a first-time home buyer, there's a lot that goes into your mortgage payment that you don't necessarily think of. So taxes, for example, so property taxes, and depending on the area that you're in, that might be high. So if you're paying $700 a month towards property taxes, that money is not going towards the equity in your home. That's just something you have to pay every single month. And toward, you know, after 4 years, you think you might have all this equity, but really you don't have as much as you might have in the home, so.
Something else to consider, because this is a very popular question. A lot of times your student loans will be in deferment, or they'll be extremely low based on income-based repayment in your early years of residency. And that's a pitfall I've seen people make too, is they commit to a mortgage payment, and then all of a sudden their student loan payments creep up unbeknownst to them, because they either didn't know or it came unexpectedly. So that's something to consider. You know, the other thing that I tell every resident or fellow that I talk to is you guys are going to have the largest jump in income next to a professional athlete or a musician, right? You're going to go from making $50,000 to $250 pretty quick in a very short period of time. Well, if you mortgage yourself and buy a house off a $50,000 salary, your lifestyle is quickly going to catch up to $250, and you're probably going to want a different house, you know, or you're going to move, or you're going to want to upgrade your home. That's a lot of times where I see your debt level come into play, where it hamstrings you, because now not only do you have your student loans, but you have this mortgage payment, and instead of a $150,000 home, you can now afford a $750,000 home, the home of your dreams, but you can't buy it because you have this other house on your books. So from a debt load standpoint, I've seen that kind of corrupt a bigger picture plan before as well.
I'm going to put a brief plug in for Michelle, because she was my real estate agent here in Maine, and she did a fabulous job. I've had another real estate agent prior to that, and my experience was horrible. So I can say that she is wonderful. So if you're staying in the Des Moines area, I highly recommend her. My question is, with the consolidation of student loans, with undergraduate, other degrees, and then of course this degree, how do you know when you're supposed to consolidate, and how do you go about doing that with, I guess, the best information possible to give resources to suggest?
Are you going to do public service by chance?
I'm on a rural medicine scholarship, so I don't actually have medical school student loans, but I have a master's degree and an undergraduate degree as well.
The first place I always tell people to go is there an opportunity through a government program that you can take advantage of first? If the answer is no, then that's a difficult question to answer, and everybody's credit history is different and whatnot, but there's a lot of terrific programs out there. SoFi being one of them. They're a program that I've had people actually use. The problem that people are running into now is they become so popular that these companies have taken on all this consolidation debt that their interest rates are starting to creep a little bit, and they might flat out not take it because they don't have enough money to give to the banks to consolidate their loans. So, you know, that question really is dependent on what your interest rates are now, and that's the biggest thing I tell people to look at. You know, when my wife got done with school, we had 12 student loans varying from 8% to 2% in interest rate. So we were fortunate enough, we did rural medicine. My wife is practicing rural medicine. We established a relationship with a local bank. And that's what I would suggest. If you know where you're going to go in rural Iowa or Midwest or wherever, you know, they want you in their community. It's good for their community to have a really good physician that's going to stick around for a long time. So they're going to be willing to work with you and give you some better interest rates. Potentially you can negotiate for better interest rates because they know you're at risk. I would look at the national programs from an interest rate perspective, and if you can't save more than a couple percent, it's difficult to advocate heavily to do that, because with federal subsidized loans, they will forgive the payment if you die, and they will forbear if you become disabled. If you privately consolidate, some of the companies do and some of them do not. So that's a big deal. You know, if you pass away, they forgive $250,000 worth of student loans. You know, that's a burden on a spouse or another loved one. So the considerations I would make is how much can you actually save in interest or a monthly payment, and then how that fits in your budget, and then also will they continue for death and disability if they will forgive or let you defer it.
And another thought to that too, when you're in residency, even though you just might not be able to do a whole lot right now because your income to debt ratio is going to be so large in residency, if you want to take those loans somewhere else, what John was saying too, you just might not get much of a change in that percentage. Whereas if you wait until you're done with residency, Now you have a much greater income, your debt to income ratio is very different. Now you could, most likely, you know, depending on credit rating and all that, most likely you'll get a better interest rate. So that's a thought. Another thing too, because we did go with SoFi, which is one of the private companies, and did get a lot better interest rate with that. But we're paying off our loans in 5 years. And we only have about 19 months left, which is good, but we did a variable rate. So, and that's risky, so it will go up or can go up. But because it's such a short period of time, we were willing to risk that happening versus a fixed rate, which will be maybe maybe a slightly higher income or a slightly higher interest rate, but it's going to be fixed and it's not going to change. So that's something to think about. The other thing too is when you're in residency and you're not making a huge amount of income, you've got some other expenses, that type of thing, you can defer your loans and so you don't have to pay on them. Whereas if you go with a private company,
The benefit of a Roth IRA is that there is a release valve there, unlike any other retirement plan. So if you put money in a 401k or even a traditional IRA, you will pay a 10% penalty to the IRS plus taxes if you make a withdrawal before 59.5. The Roth IRA gets rid of the 10% penalty, and as long as you take only your contribution out, it's non-taxable. So here's what I would argue, is that gives you kind of the best of both worlds. If you need the money, it's potentially available. The downside there is if you make the max contribution, which if you're under 50 is $5,500. If you make $5,500 contribution, your account drops based on market loss to $4,000, you can only take out $4,000. If it grows to $10,000, you can still only take out the $5,500. So I always tell people there's very few recommendations, and I would argue that you guys would say this in the medical field as well, that kind of work for everybody. One of them in the medical field's a good diet and exercise, right? That's pretty universal. The Roth IRA is as close to that as we can get, where if you qualify, it's pretty sound if you pick low, moderate to average risk investments at a very low fee, that strategy is going to work out pretty well long term.
With that, do you think it's about
I'm gonna
the
make you
taking
ask.
out to, so in this case, he's taking out money from loans and then putting that into the Roth?
Yep.
Is that a good idea?
I'm not a huge advocate of that, but here's what I would tell you. If your student loan interest rate, it's never a great thing to pay interest to somebody. It also can be terrible. You're creating leverage. The S&P over the course of the last rolling 12 months has averaged over 20%. If your student loan interest rate's 6, you're up 14. But next year, the market could correct and it could be down 30, and you would only have paid 6. So that's a risky strategy to take, to borrow money to fund a Roth. I've seen people do it. I've seen it work out. I've seen it fail miserably. At the end of the day, if the interest rate is ridiculously low, like under 5%, I think it's maybe an okay strategy. It wouldn't be something that I would advocate heavily for.
I just have to add from a financial aid standpoint, in the financial aid office, we have to tell you that your student loans are for educational purposes only. So we would not recommend doing that at all.
That's an interesting strategy. If you have the money in the bank, I think it's more advantageous to borrow it. I wouldn't let my wife do that, if that answers your question.
So I have a question come back to establishing a relationship with the financial planner early on. So since I don't know where I'm going to be at for residency, so how do I maintain that relationship? Can that be maintained remotely?
Absolutely. It really, I don't know who said it, but it's really a comfort level. Similar to when we all go to see our physician, we establish a rapport and have some trust with that person. I have clients that did residency at DMU or Mercy that are all over the country. Oregon, Wyoming, Montana, Alaska, Florida. I would advocate that you can have a great relationship with somebody if you're tech savvy, which most of you probably are. It's really, one of those decisions that if you trust the person and you want to continue to work with them, you can certainly make that work.
So with taxes being due soon, do student loans play into, do they have any effect on your tax money you owe, or can you get back, or can you write the interest rate off?
If you're making
elaborate on
payments.
that at all? Or if you are making payments?
If you're making payments, your income's under $100,000, there's the ability to deduct some of that student loan interest. I shouldn't speak out of turn because I haven't dug in super deep on the new tax reform that's coming out in February. But as it sits right now, if you've made interest payments, that would have been deductible. If you're just deferring, then you can't deduct deferred interest.
So you get out of residency and have your big student loan payment and also looking at investing towards the future. What's your take on a good balance as far as paying down the loans heavily versus investing heavily? Like how do you approach that?
I have some thoughts. Go ahead.
I'll take just a very I'm going to approach it from like the spending plan perspective. Again, it goes back to a balance. The paying back of your student loans, that's going to be a requirement of certain dollar amounts. So it really goes back to our prior discussion of what you do with those student loans. Always know where they're at, know all the details about them, but know what your plan is there on what you feel is going to be best. And before you make that decision, see how that offsets with the saving component for the future. Because somewhere in the middle there, you've got your today impact as well. And so it's got to be that, again, it goes back to that plan, but remember the requirement part is going to be the paying those back and not getting in a jam of too heavy on one end where you can't make the other happen.
And the thing to keep in mind is you've leveraged your good name to borrow this money. It's an unsecured debt, right? You don't have a house you can give back or a car. You can't give your education at DMU back to the bank if you default on the loans. So you've created this leverage to have the ability to go earn all this income. You know, one of the common things that I try to coach my clients on is it's okay to have this debt. I understand and appreciate that it's a large amount and it keeps you up at night and it drives a lot of your thought processes, but you can let that go to some extent. If you're making $250,000 a year and you owe $250,000, if you can't create a plan to pay that off in 5 to 10 years, you know, you're probably spending money where you shouldn't. So to answer that question on a balancing act standpoint or percentage is very difficult. It's really about what your goals are. You know, I ask my clients, what keeps you up at night? Is this loan driving your decision-making process on everything else? Then let's plan around trying to clean it up. But there does need to be a balance there, and we have a lot of financial planning software that we show this with people that you do paying that debt down is good and saving that interest, but not to the point where you're stymieing your ability to save for your own personal retirement. So the answer is a little bit of both. And what that little bit means is really dictated on what kind of emotional reaction you get to having the debt, because that's gonna give you energy to do more of good stuff. Either way, you're growing your net worth. When people see me, that's what I always say is, our job is to help you grow your net worth. You do that 2 ways. You pay down debt and you save to accumulate. Both are good.
I would agree with that too, and also on the idea of goals. So, you know, we've had questions in the past where, you know, somebody wants to adopt a child and that's their highest goal. So saving towards that, or saving towards a home, or, you know, figuring out what it is that are your biggest goals and then putting a little bit of money in those little pockets. The other thing too is when you're coming right out of residency, I think a little bit of good advice is, you know, you're used to being a little bit frugal because you haven't had a big income, so you can throw a little bit more money at some of these things. So for us, I mean, as I mentioned, kind of my biggest thing was getting rid of the debt, and we had quite a bit of it, so doing it in 5 years was something important to us. We also didn't have a house, so we wanted to save for a house, but we were able to save, you know, $5,000 every month in order to get us for a down payment. Like, that was pretty easy because we were bringing in a lot more money, and yet we weren't living way beyond our means right away. Currently, I think it's helpful to just give you some real numbers, but so my mortgage is $3,000 per month and my student loan debt is $3,000 per month. So I could have a home with a lot more mortgage, and I have a nice home. It's not, you know, it's not a terrible home. So I could afford more, but it's more important to me right now to just wipe that debt out. And we're still able to save quite a bit for retirement as well. So, you know, prioritizing those things and always kind of paying yourself first is another thing that you've probably heard of. So, you know, making sure that that money goes to that first, because if it's in your checking book at the end of the month, there's a chance that it's probably going to go somewhere else. So, you know, setting that up, which is part of the budgeting process, and just funneling all these things to the right places right away. You don't even see it, you don't think about it, and then you look in there and there's, you know, a good chunk of money after a couple months. So those would be some thoughts.
two things that I don't know a lot about but have heard like are good things to have is disability insurance as a physician or just life insurance. Do you know anything about either of those, and when would you like recommend it's a good time to start looking into purchasing some of those type of policies?
I can fill that one. I think we're going to do a presentation here around graduation about protecting your income. That'll speak more to that, so a little plug, I think. I can't remember when that is, but show up for that and we'll give you all the details. But I'm a huge proponent of disability insurance. I haven't had many people that started here that I've worked with over a number of years pass away. I've had a ton become disabled. You know, we think of disability commonplace that somebody's in a wheelchair and can't do anything. That's not reality. Reality is you're out skiing doing normal things and you break both your legs and you're able to work part-time but not at your full capacity. So many disability contracts read that they'll pay you a percentage of the benefit based on how disabled you are. So for example, if you can work 50% of the time, they'll pay you 50% of your benefit. The other thing that I'm a huge proponent of, and I've seen this play out probably 6 out of 10 times with residents, is you were going to go start doing rotation. Young, now is probably the peak of your health. If you can get those things, you can generally acquire them pretty inexpensive. It's just a matter of doing some research. So I'm a big advocate that people get that as soon as possible.
So how soon into their first year of residency do residents typically talk to you as a financial planner?
You know, so I work really closely with 2 residencies in town, Mercy and Broadlands, because I've had friends go through there. My wife went through Broadlands. And generally speaking, we pick some up at DMU, but usually it's the end of the first year because you're a little bit overwhelmed early on, you know, and you're juggling a lot of balls. I mean, you're going to go from graduating here and in a few short months, you have to find a place to live, you're in a residency program, there's just a lot coming at you. You know, I always advocate the sooner the better, but I would suggest it's usually about the end of the first year, halfway through.
Okay.
Some wait till the 3rd year just because they don't want to deal with it. You know, everybody's a little bit different, but it's no different than diet and exercise, which you guys are going to be recommending to everybody. The sooner you start and create those habits, the easier it is to execute to them.
Another thing too, when you're starting residency, there's usually some kind of a retirement plan. So, I mean, as far as like a 401k or something like that. So that's just something not to leave on the table. So, you know, sometimes residents do, but you might have to put a little bit in for a match. So, you know, you put in $500 per month and they give you $500 per month or something to that effect. But, you know, don't leave that free money on the table. So even if it's just a little bit, that can help, or maybe that's your savings too. So,
Kind of play off that question, John. When do you usually see maybe DPTs or PAs that they don't have a residency, so they don't have that 3 or 4 years where they're building up to their big income? They kind of graduate and bam, that's their salary. So when do maybe you typically see them in your practice?
I would advocate, you know, and this could be inaccurate, but I remember my wife had a little spell, I think she had to pass a board exam or something before she started residency. She had this like 2 or 3 month window where she was studying and had some time. I would suggest if you engage with an advisor that's working on a plan, not on selling you a product, that's a very clear definition you want to work out with someone, is if they're working on your plan, you have to commit to. So it's no different than setting a New Year's resolution to go to the gym. If you have a personal trainer that you're seeing 3 days a week, you're more apt, and paying for that, you're more apt to go. Similar with working with a financial advisor. If there's no skin in the game, it comes from both ends. You know, you have to be committed to commit the time to create a budget, to gather documents, to call your lender and get your interest rate and your payments and find out the deferment options, or work with this individual to do it together. So I would suggest, you know, whenever you can commit the time. For us, when we take someone through our financial planning process, it's usually 5 or 6 appointments, which are an hour plus 2 or 3 hours of homework. So you're talking about 12 to 15 hours of time that you have to commit to do this when you might not have it, you know, depending on where your exams, your class loads are and stuff. So I would work it around that, and if you're committed to it, the benefits, I would equate it a lot of times when I work with residents for the first time or DMU students is it's real scary because you don't know what to expect. No different than when I go to see a doctor, right? I hope not to go a whole lot, so I don't want to spend a whole lot of time in there. But if you do your homework before and you have some conversations and you're very open with whoever you choose to work with, you're going to have a really good result. So the timing of that's really dependent on when you're willing to commit to it.
Another thing that John said that made me think of something, and he mentioned it, but really know your lender or know your loan, and because you may have these different levels of interest rates, and you can put more money, or you can divert some of the money towards the higher interest rate, but your servicing company is not going to just do that on its own. I mean, you have to direct those things, so you have to spend the time to know. And I mean, I think when I was in your shoes, it's just like, you have this huge amount of money, but you don't know what the numbers are, you don't know what the rates are, so you really have to get a handle on that, and it does take time, and it's kind of painful a little bit to be on the phone for, an hour or more, but you can really make that work for you, but it does take time, and you just have to, and it's only, it's 1 hour of your time, so you just have to figure it out and make it happen, but that can be helpful.
So how soon into like your first year residency are you actually paying back the loans? Because I mean, you don't have any income until like the first 2 weeks that you work in July, right?
Well, you're paying pretty much right away. It goes into repayment, I think July or something. I mean, when you're done, 6 months, sorry. Okay, so you have 6 months of a grace period where you don't have to pay. And you can defer generally the whole residency if you want to. You can go into financial, I don't know what the term is, hardship or something, but it behooves you to try to pay something towards, especially if you're able to pay towards your interest or something like that. So it's helpful if you can pay a little bit, but yeah, you have that grace period of 6 months.
Most of the lenders are very flexible too. I mean, I encourage everybody, unless you're a husband-wife or dual income house, then it eliminates you from a lot of the income-based repayment. It's a reasonable amount. It's something, and I feel most of the times when I've seen it, it's reasonable to the point where it's not going to stymie lifestyle. But that's something. The difficult part is, and I was fortunate that my wife, we had a very clear idea of the general area geographically we wanted to be in. So it eliminated a lot of options, and it only created 4 or 5 different places where she could work in rural Iowa. I would encourage people to start thinking in terms of that. Where do you want to be? Where would you be happy? And then you can start gauging the different places you can work, because I think one of the biggest missed or overlooked things is everybody wants to stay in Des Moines because they have all those places to shop and it's more comfortable to live. And if you get on to rural medicine, these communities are willing to bend over backwards for you, to the extent where I've seen them buy people homes to get them to come and sign 10-year deals. That's pretty extreme if you don't know you're going to like it, but the government is providing programs that will forgive your student loans if you're willing to commit to work in rural Iowa and throughout the Midwest. I think it would behoove you to put some thought into that as well, because you might end up paying far less than you think, particularly if you take full advantage of some of these programs.
Thank you.
I just want to real quick plug financial aid too, because we will sit down with you during your last year. We'll sit down with you anytime, but specifically during your last year. And we can run repayment estimators for you, and we can talk about all the different repayment plans, and if you do have a residency, we can talk about strategies during residency and what to do, and if you're a DPT or PA and you're not facing a residency, we can just go straight into, here's what your payment's going to be, and here's the different plans you can use. So definitely utilize your resources that are free here at DMU, which would be financial aid office.
And to Dr. Hyman's point, if you have $100,000 in student loan debt and you're paying 6% interest, that's $6,000 a year, right? That's $500 a month you're paying these companies to do nothing for you. And they will not pick up the phone and call you unless it's time to pay. So if you were paying me $500 a month, I would expect that I would return your phone call. pick up the phone and call them, and they work for you, you know? You're paying them an absorbent amount of money to service these loans for you. Take advantage of that. They all have great websites. It's really a commitment of time, again, to educate yourself.
Michael.
So I have a question. Okay, so when you're going from like managing your own finances, like being married and like having, you know, now like maybe thinking about joining accounts and that kind of stuff, do you have any like general advice for like, is it good to do that right away or like kind of slowly join things over time, or yeah, just general questions about that?
I'll jump on that one. It is very situational. Everyone is wired differently. And honestly, having those conversations before you even get married is a great idea, because personal finances can be a very large stress in any relationship. And but have the conversations. If it helps, again, time is of the essence, so if it helps, just say, Monday night, that's our night, 30 minutes caps, no cell phones, no anything. It's strictly a non-emotional conversation. And the non-emotional part becomes really important, because to so many of us, like John said, what's keeping you up at night? If it's that student debt, that becomes emotional. And so limit yourself, but start having those conversations earlier. And if you need to, find a third party outside that's going to help you create that plan that is going to work for both of you. But as busy as you're going to be, and as busy as your partner is going to be, managing, you know, their career, whatever they're doing as well, it's very easy to lose sight of your goal together when it comes to finances. And so starting that early, see what's going to work, and have those conversations, honestly, before you make any commitment of drastic changes to, oh, we're married, now we need to get it all put together.
I found also it's a lot of divide and conquer with a household.
That's just the way they know how to do it. That's the only way they know how to do it, you know, and it might not be the best option, but kind of having that understanding, I think, can be helpful. And then yeah, just learning it together, I think, is kind of fun, because, you know, you're building your lives together, you've got a lot of things together, which is fun. So I think, I mean, we share everything, so and I like that, but then we make all the decisions together, you know, and not every decision is easy, but then you're both in it, and that's worked well for us, so.
A big recommendation I would make is to get a really good budget. You know, it's no different than as we set these resolutions to go out and work out and get in better health. You know, you're not going to change spending habits. So if you can save and pay yourself first and create this budget and do a lot of those things, then you know whatever you have left, spend away. You're not changing your habits necessarily, you're just repurposing the money early, so once it hits the account, you can do what you want.
My question is about healthcare insurance when you enter residency. So my wife works, and we get insurance through our office right now. But what does insurance look like for residents? Is the kind of thing that it would make sense? Because I have this theory in my head that hospitals and working for hospitals mean you get great insurance. But I guess I'm asking, is that true? And is it likely that we'll switch insurers when I go into residency?
Legally speaking, you'll have the option. So they have to offer you, since you're coming in a new employment, if that's not the case, you can switch during open enrollment periods, which is generally November-ish of the year. I would tell you, if you're staying in Iowa, most of the insurances I've seen on the health insurance side from the various medical institutions are fantastic. When my wife was at Broadlands, she had a C-section with her first child, and it was $200. You know, I would agree with what you said, that most of the time, if you work for a medical institution, you're getting your health care for a pretty discounted rate.
But you should be able to now, so, you know, when you go into residency and on into life, if you want to, if both people are working, you'll have options, so you can always cherry pick. You can just say, okay, well, this is the best for us as a husband and wife, or this is best for, you know, maybe one person carries the spouse and children, or, you know, the children, or whatever kind of, I mean, maybe it's a cheaper plan, or maybe it's a better plan, or whatever. You always have that option, so you can put both people on it, or one person on it, or kids on it, or however you choose to break it up. And that's also true with your other benefits. You know, if you have better life insurance, you can choose to use that, or whatever.
And again, you know, every year there's open enrollment where your employer is forced to give you the option, and you'll both get enrollment benefits booklets where you can compare and contrast.
So I know this depends on credit and all that, but in terms of saving for buying a house, what's a good percentage to kind of keep in mind as a goal for a down payment?
If you don't want to pay any private mortgage insurance, then the goal would be 20% down. And then it kind of steps down from that. I mean, you could do 10% down, then you'll pay, you know, a certain amount of private mortgage insurance. The more you put down, the less that you'll pay for the private mortgage insurance, you know, for the bank to loan you the money. You know, and there's various loan programs. I mean, there's FHA programs that only require, you know, 3%, 3.5% that actually can be gifted to you from, you know, a parent or someone. Then it jumps up to the conventional loan, which is at 5%. That's the least amount that you can put down for a conventional loan. So, I mean, those are kind of the stats that the lenders use when they're going to make a loan for you. So it it depends again, you know, what price range of home do you think that you would like, and if you want to, how much you want to save for that.
So you're setting aside your money to make your down payment on your home or whatever. Where is a good spot to put that while you're saving it up? Like a money market account or something where you're still getting interest, but it's relatively fluid? Is there a better option?
You're going to want to keep that liquid. You know, I'm a big proponent of having 3 to 6 months of income in an emergency reserve that's not invested in anything. Unfortunately, in the interest rate environment we're in, they're not that great. If you can draw any interest, it's worth jumping on, as long as, to your point, they don't put a lot of constraints on access or liquidity.
Okay, do we have one last question? If not, panel members, do you guys have any last comments that you want to leave with?
You might have had a question.
Oh, do you have a question? Okay, good, just a second.
This is about the last question, like money market versus considering like a high yield bank account, because I mean, over like $10,000 or something, you can start using money market. Those as liquid as just a bank account, I just kind of don't know. I know that they give you much better interest, but is this a good option?
What I would advise is talk to your financial institution. They could have a savings account that's called a money market, but really it's a savings account. Or, you know, everyone uses, you say tomato, I say tomato. And so if you've got a financial institution that you are very, very good at working with, or you're comfortable working with, I would 100% advise you to go to them. see how they answer that, because then they're answering it directly to the type of product you are currently in. And then if they can't answer the other end of that question, that's when you find someone like John to take that question to.
And I would suggest right now, I wouldn't split hairs there. You know, if you're very, very fortunate, you may get 1%, but generally it's 10 or 20 basis points. So on that $10,000, you're talking about $20 a year. You might be better off saving your cans and recycling.
Yeah, you want something where, you know.
If you have
it's-
access.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I just want to thank all the students for coming and asking your questions. Hopefully you guys got to soak up some great advice, and thank panel members so much for coming and donating your time. And hopefully we see you all again, the next panel of experts that we do.